Welcome to Watermark's Church Leadership Podcast, conversation with church leaders for church leaders. And I'm your host, John McGee. Well, hey friends, welcome back. Got a little bit of a unique episode today, joined, as often is the case, by my friend Dave Bruskas, the wise sage, the baseball aficionado. Welcome, brother.
Well, that's above my pay grade there, but it's good to be with you.
Okay, so Dave, I'm back from a trip.
Yeah.
Was in Switzerland,
Wow.
and so we talked just a little bit about this. But I wanted to tell you about one of my favorite parts of that trip.
Okay.
And I said, well, if I just tell you, we'll just tell everybody. And so I went to Switzerland with some friends. We hiked a kind of a trek called Mont Blanc. You hike around the mountain called Mont Blanc. It's 1,600 feet, and you just kind of hike from, really from town to town to town. And so that in of itself was amazing. Great friends, great views, all of it, 11 out of 10. But I actually think one of the highlights of that trip, one of the biggest highlights was some time we spent in Geneva, Switzerland, which is where John Calvin did most of his ministry. So if you're listening and you have no idea who John Calvin is, I don't know that I know a whole lot more than you, but, 1517, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, but, Luther famously writes the 95 Thesis. So he's kind of the guy that's probably the most prominent. There was something in the water. Lots of people were reforming, speaking out against the church. This idea of grace, as the means of salvation really becomes prominent, not works. And then there's, a whole cast of characters that come along. Zwingli is he is up in Zurich, and you've got John Knox in Scotland, and then John Calvin would have been primarily in Geneva. And so we took this tour, and the city is beautiful. I had a friend say that you could eat off the streets in Geneva. I didn't.
Just like here in Dallas, right?
Yeah, I didn't try, but I looked down a couple times. That might actually be the case. But myself, my wife Pam, and some friends, we kind of did this tour, just kind of walking where Calvin would have walked, and being where where he would have preached his sermons and all that. And so it was really meaningful for me, and it's one of the things I know about myself, that if I put myself physically in places where things have happened of substance, there's a bit of a just kind of a burst of inspiration, of ideas, of clarity. And I feel like God speaks to me in those moments. Some days I want to, or someday before I die, I want to go stand in Worms, where Luther said, "Here I stand, I can do no other." And I just want to, I don't know, have a cup of coffee and open my Bible and be there. But so I was in Geneva, and I'd love to tell you about it. So have you been to Geneva?
No, I haven't. I would love to go someday. I've always wanted to do a Reformation tour. And I think what you and I have in common, as we have side conversations often, is all these things develop within a context, right? And it's fascinating for me to see a person's life and try to imagine what that life was like. Because you and I know the theology. Yeah. We can read the writings, but what was the context behind that? And so would love to hear what that was like for you. And then I'd love to know, was it strange to be in a place that I think you would say is post-Christian every day, and yet
absolutely
is in many ways the epicenter of the Protestant Reformation?
Yeah.
What was that like? Yeah,
that was crazy. Well, what was really fun was I've got some thoughts I sketched down. I'll share them with you. But there was this moment, and I'm in the church where John Knox would have preached, and I may have sent you a picture, but I'm right there under his pulpit. I tried so hard to get in his pulpit, and I just could not get this guy to budge. And he said, "If you come back," and I was willing to do. I was like, I've never threatened someone. I might, obviously not. But he said, you have to set that up way in advance, and so I hadn't even thought that. But I'm standing under his pulpit, and I've got this copy, an early copy of the Geneva Study Bible. So that's the really. I think this is the case. It was the very first complete Bible written in English. So John Knox, who was from Scotland, was exiled, and he went to Geneva and preached to English-speaking people that were there. They were also exiled, and he translated the whole Bible into English. So I've got this. Here I am. I've got this Geneva Study Bible, and I'm opening it, and I'm under John Calvin's pulpit, and my wife was like, "Oh, you are such a fanboy," But it was just like I'm tied to, in this moment, these amazing men of God, and it was really, really powerful. But yes, in that, let me end actually with I'll end with some thoughts on that, great. What it was like to actually be there in a place that it is post-Christian. It is post-Christian, which is so fascinating, and yet I think his life and ministry had a deep impact. So one of the first things I just was struck by was how young he was when he started formulating his thoughts and sharing them. Do you know how old he was when he wrote the Institutes? Young. 27 years old.
Wow.
He's 27 years old. And I just thought, man, I was doing good just to get to work on time, when I was 27, not writing, one of the definitive works on kind of, Reformed theology. So it was just walking around thinking about him. But I think I wrote down 5 things, Dave, that I just kind of walked away with. And the first one I was so struck by was how it was not about him.
Yeah.
And he, again, he'd already, written this amazing runaway bestseller with the Institutes. I mean, he was, if there was a New York Times list, he would have hit it, and he was a big deal. And basically, one of his friends, his name is Farrell, convinces him, maybe even coerces him to come to Geneva and preach. And so he becomes kind of a big deal. He's a very, very quiet man. He's just not looking for the spotlight. And so many choices he made, and here's just a couple, were so that he stayed out of the limelight. So it wouldn't be confusing that it was somehow about him, or that people would be enamored with him instead of Christ. And it was just this drumbeat. And so everyone wanted to write, or draw, better said, pictures of him, and he would not allow. Like, you want the ultimate foul, and it's like he wouldn't allow you to take a selfie.
He's a modern character. Yeah, no selfies with John Calvin. Sorry,
it's such a bummer. I would have loved
no
one.
Autographs.
And so you think about like social media today, which is basically not others, but putting pictures of yourself up, but you putting pictures of yourself up. And I just wondered I would have loved a sermon from John Calvin on Instagram, on Facebook or TikTok, and we've had this conversation a couple weeks ago.
What's interesting about that is that if you go back and you look at his writings, he was really a forerunner. And from a biblical framework of kind of know yourself. Mm-hmm. And so high emphasis on the glory of God and the greatness of God and the supremacy of God, but also kind of know yourself. If you know yourself and you know God, you're off to a good start. And so how interesting that him knowing himself and knowing who God was really shied away from the limelight.
Yeah.
Really fascinating.
In loving yourself. That was actually a big, it wasn't just like somehow no. Yeah. And which is.
That's pretty unique in that for the time he was in. That's,
correct. You probably wouldn't think he would say that.
No.
Yeah. And then Dave, he was so adamant. So I think a lot of the pictures we have of Calvin today were either one or two things. They were like bootlegged. So they basically they did it against his will, or after the fact. Yeah. And then, and then he was buried, and he was very, very specific. He wanted to be buried in an unmarked grave, undisclosed location, unmarked grave. And so they've got some ideas, but I don't think they really know where he was. And so they he didn't want people making, which is exactly what I did, make a pilgrimage to see, John Knox. He just didn't want it to be about him, and he really was. He was about the glory of God and not himself. And it just. In a best possible way, it just messed with me, and I was like, I want to be more like that in a culture that is trying to draw attention to yourself. I want to be faithful, and I want, God needs to push some people forward in public. He really does. So I'm not advocating that we all move to the desert and become monks, but I just don't know that we need to seek that out. And that was just a really, really good reminder. So. Another one I wrote down, and just, kind of in my notes as I went back and looked over, that he chose the hard path. God, he chose the hard path. And so part of the story is he's in Geneva, and he's, they've basically said, hey, we're good with the Reformation. We be our pastor. And so he starts preaching. He preached verse by verse, which is so fun. That was a new idea. The Latin phrase would be lectio continua. So that was new and novel. Just preach through, and he would preach through. I think he took him like 1 year to preach through the book of Job.
Wow.
How repetitive some of that is in the middle, and you would. His people understood pain and suffering and trials, just from sitting under that. But so he starts the church and the ministry, and it's going well. And they say, hey, we're all in on this. And he exercises church discipline. And then it wasn't so fun to be in John Calvin's church, and they really rose up and sent him. They didn't kill him, but they sent him out in exile. So here was this man who came, in some ways against his will, to Geneva. He was pouring his life out, and they run him out of town. So he moves to Strasbourg, Germany, and man, life gets good and it gets easy. So he gets married, kind of finds the love of his life, and is just pastoring this little church. It was, some biographer said it was the happiest time of his life. Yeah. Like he's just not, he's out of the limelight. He's not messing with this stiff-necked people in Geneva, and he's just got a good thing going. Well, Geneva realizes, oh, we made a terrible mistake. We just let John Calvin go, and so they want to woo him back, and so he really has to wrestle then with, what do I do? I've got a good life. This is easy. Metaphorically, my feet are up, and if I go back there, it's into the lion's den.
It's tough.
And this same stiff-necked people that ran me out, I've got to go right back there. Do I want to do that? And we know the rest of the story. He did. He went back there, and this is such a baller move. He was preaching through Psalms when he was run out, and he went back into the pulpit and picked up exactly where he left off. And so I don't know what he said, but in French, something, as I was saying, which is just like, that's so cool. And he really, it was a hard life, and he's just like all of his physical ailments. He had asthma and migraine and stomach ulcers and gout. And I think he died ultimately of tuberculosis. His wife had died with tuberculosis. And it was like, physically it was hard. His ministry was hard. He preached, he would basically have this 1 week on, 1 week off. If he was in the pulpit that week, he would preach every single day. And he prepared enough that this is crazy. He had no notes. He just walked up and just preached. And then after that, rather than taking a week off, after, imagine preaching 7 messages and then twice on Sunday, then he would lecture to students the next week. And it was hard. And he rewrote the Institutes like 5 times in Latin and multiple times in French, and expanded it. So it was already a bestseller. And he said, you know what, I think I can make it better. Yeah. And no one was probably asking him to. The publishers weren't calling and saying, hey, I think we could make this better. He just had a sense like, I'm going to be faithful here, and I'm going to, even if it's difficult, I am going to make this better. And so, I think a lot of times here in the West, we are gravitating towards lives of ease.
Yes. Yeah.
And I was just really, really challenged by how much he chose the very, very hard path.
It's interesting when you look back on characters like John Calvin, Martin Luther, Jonathan Edwards. They all seem to have that similar thread of suffering early on in life in multiple facets.
Yeah, that's part of what
all of them they'll have real conflict with the church, which is interesting. But, we shouldn't be surprised, I guess, as that continues today. Yeah. You see that. But the other thing they have that's really unique, and I think this is true of most Christian biography, there's an obsessive aspect to who they are that makes them really unique, but also for those around them makes them a little bit prickly. And so it's such a fascinating thing to read, and because it's so consistent. You see this over and over again.
That's so good, Dave.
So there's got to be something in, if you're thinking at it from their perspective, there has to be a freedom of understanding suffering. Yeah. God has purpose in the suffering, and then there's got to be a real freedom of, I have to be okay with not everybody getting me and liking me, because it's just the nature of what God,
Yes.
I want to please God. And if that means the people around me don't understand me or don't appreciate me, then so be it.
Yeah.
And I think that's so counterintuitive. I think we live in a world today where we so want the likes, we so want the attention, we so want the admiration of others. And that's a real consistency, I think, in his life, but also many impactful reformers and other impactful Christians of, hey, there's something God's called me to, and I'm going to do it obsessively.
Yep.
And it may rub some people the wrong way, and that's okay. And I'm going to suffer.
Yeah.
And, we think about when we debate Christian theology today, I think we just don't understand the stakes that those early reformers had.
Oh.
To us, it's in the realm of ideas.
Yes.
We might engage online, kind of life and death for these guys, and it's just really different than.
Yes.
So I think there needs, and I bet you saw this firsthand. There's got to be a renewed appreciation for the cost of all that went into what you and I enjoy the fruit of today.
Yes. Yeah. There was definitely a sense of I am here because because of these men, and my faith is somehow touched. And I'm in their downline in some respects. I don't agree with everything that Calvin said,
Sure.
but his writings, his works have influenced men who have influenced me, and I'm in the downline. And it was, man, they weren't chasing. Yeah, you're right. They weren't chasing the likes, and it wasn't. We tend to think that if things are growing, if people like us, we're doing the right thing. And there's a sense he wouldn't have had that same kind of framework. It was, am I being faithful? Am I doing what God would have me do right now? The Protestant work ethic, the suffering, that's what's important. And kind of who cares about if they put me on their shoulders or they run me out of town.
Yeah.
That's really inconsequential to me. It's a second tier concern. First tier is, am I being faithful? And that was just good. Just kind of like a recalibration. I think for me was really helpful. So you talked about life or death. It's a pretty good segue into. One thing, Dave. I think when we were talking about Calvin and Knox, I might have transposed some of that. So if that wasn't clear, Calvin is in Geneva, and Knox was in Scotland, Edinburgh specifically, and so that's where his ministry was. He's the one who translated the Bible into English, and he did so when he was in exile there in Geneva, preaching kind of side by side with Calvin, and then he went back. So if I mixed my words, somehow that's what. Hopefully that's clear. I didn't send people down some theological rabbit hole that ChatGPT could not sort out because of what I said. So, but my third big takeaway was that Calvin really was a mixed bag.
Yeah,
he was a
He's
mixed
flawed.
bag. Yeah, Dave, he was flawed, man, and it was just interesting to wrestle with that. So we've got all his writings. His incredible faithfulness in the pulpit, but he sent some people to death.
Yeah,
and it was a different time then. So it was, all of this was life and death, and people were getting killed on all sides because of what they believed. But there was a couple times where he could have stopped it.
Yeah, exactly.
And he could have, and rather than hitting the brake, he hit the accelerator and sent people to their death, most famously for just, issues around the Trinity and heresy. And so it was so important to him that he didn't feel like he could let that propagate through his, through his congregation. But man, I don't know that was the most God-honoring response. Jesus didn't kill the people that he had disagreements with theologically. He taught them, he admonished them, he said harsh things to them, but he didn't pull out a sword and off with their
Probably
heads.
the most biblical perspective we'd have on that is the Apostle Paul handing somebody over to Satan, but he doesn't hand him over to the executioner as well, right?
Right.
Maybe he does indirectly, but not directly. And so, and I think, John, here's a mistake I think we make currently. People are complicated.
Yes.
You're complicated. I'm
Yes.
complicated. You have strengths. I have weaknesses. You have areas of growth in your life, and I do too. And I don't know if it's because we live in a soundbite world or limited that we get a ton of content out that's very short, we tend to make people one-dimensional.
Yeah.
So we either tend to glorify their strengths and we characterize them accordingly, or we demonize their weaknesses. And yet we see this throughout Scripture. It's true of anthropology. We are sinners and saints simultaneously. And so I don't think we should be surprised that John Calvin was too.
Yeah.
That he had some significant
Yeah.
glaring weaknesses, and so did Martin Luther, and so did Jonathan Edwards, and whoever you want to put in that category. They all do, and we do today too. I'm not suggesting for a minute we don't hold our leaders to a high standard according to Scripture.
Yep.
1 Timothy 3, Titus 1 for elders and those called to that. But we've got to stop this. I think we've got to stop this either glorifying the person according to all their strengths and not taking account for the weakness, or vice versa, which I think is much more a part of cancel culture today, is you're demonized according to all your weaknesses, and we don't understand you for the complexity that you are, that I am, that we all are as human beings, even as we're being redeemed.
Yeah. That's it. I just kept walking around going, you know what? Calvin was a mixed bag, and so am I.
Yeah.
So are we.
Yeah.
And that's how this is going to be, this side of heaven. And so, not to, complete. I mean, I've read Calvin's Institutes. I think once. I've not picked it back up. And I was blessed, and yet there's some mistakes. And I just, I walked away, Dave, just kind of going, hey, I wanted to give grace to people that are trying to do anything of substance, and when they do it imperfectly, kind of give some grace, and give grace to myself to know that I'm going to make mistakes. I have made mistakes, and I will make mistakes. But it doesn't mean that I'm not trying to steward my life well. That most days, often, I wake up and the most important thing to me is God and being faithful to Him. But man, I'm gonna be short with my wife, or I'm not gonna be as thoughtful as I should be. And that's kind of the human experience on this side of eternity. And I think someone of that stature, just sometimes we forget that they're human, and a mixed bag.
I think there's one other application of that to consider, John. See if you agree with me on this. If that's true of individuals, that we're mixed bag, then that's going to be true of who we are collectively in the local church. Absolutely. Too, right?
So
and
so good.
I think what's discouraging is when you see somebody that comes into the church, whatever the local church is, gets a little bit disgruntled by its lack of perfection and its brokenness, which is truly there, and then walks away as if that church is out of alignment with what's been going on historically and even who they are. So my thought is, if we can give grace to individuals like that, we ought to give grace to each other collectively. And again, I'm not saying that you just need to endure church hurt, or that you need to endure bad leadership or bad doctrine. But I am saying we're flawed. And the beauty of who we are as a community is really our King Jesus, and we are a work in progress.
Yeah. If you're on a team, your teammates will, do or say something that's unbecoming of a Christian leader. And if you're sitting under preaching, they will say something that is incorrect, and might not say hi when they walk by in the hall, or a whole host of things. And they're human. And if anybody should, that was kind of thing. If anybody should have categories of grace and forgiveness, it should be us. And sometimes we're the fastest to just cancel people. And so, we're a mixed bag. It gave me somehow some comfort that Calvin was a mixed bag. I'm a mixed bag. We're all mixed bags. And we want to do the best we can, and know that probably in hindsight there will be some things we would have done differently. So, two more here, Dave. One more, I guess this would be number 4 if there's a list, is that Calvin really he kind of ran through the tape. And, when he was older, and he was suffering kind of all of these illnesses, at that point, it's kind of like, hey, you put enough points on the board, like, you're good, man. You've well done, good and faithful servant. Just spend the last, days, weeks, months, years, kicking back, whatever it would have been for them to sit around and read ESPN or watch ESPN or just kind of read trivial things. He earned that right. He earned that right. And yet he wanted to preach, man. And really, I'm sure it gave him joy, but also he just felt a responsibility. And so he couldn't walk from his house to the church, which would, I would guess maybe 150 yards,
Wow.
something like that, and he couldn't walk that way. So they
He was
put
that limited
yeah,
physically.
yeah.
Wow.
So they come by, they grab a mattress, roll him out, put him on, roll him up into that pulpit, so it would be about, kind of 12 feet off the ground, and just kind of prop him up there, and he would preach, and then they'd roll him back down the stairs, put him on the mattress, and walk him back,
Wow.
And it was like, hey, bud, you've done enough, man.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
no one's going to accuse you of being lazy or not being faithful. And he just ran
Yeah.
through the tape, and it was really, really fun.
Isn't it funny, too, when we look back? You just telling that story made me think of this. We do tend to romanticize the life of someone. I mean, can you imagine how tedious it would have been to go through the Institutes and revise it over and over
Oh, my
again,
gosh.
and to preach verse by verse for all those years? It's, we see it now as so impactful. So we tend to, again, I think we exaggerate what it must have been like, but that's just a living in the mundane, being faithful day in and day out, and up until the point that Jesus takes you home. And I think, again, that's another cultural thing we've lost sight of.
Yeah.
We live for the big moments now.
Yeah, that's good.
And everything is the next big thing.
So
And the reality
good.
of it is,
So good.
God works through the mundane. Just the faithful study and preaching and writing of study of His Word, preaching His Word, writing about His Word, and we're here today, standing on the shoulders
That's
of
right.
someone like that. But
Yeah.
it's not sexy, is it?
We're not talking about his sermon on Job 32,
No.
33,
His
and
Song
34.
of Solomon series. Like, man, did you get that?
He
It
just,
was
he was
amazing.
just faithful. And so I'll close with this one here, Dave. But I think, as much as anything, I think these points are fascinating. They were to me. But, you just want to call out for leaders, hey, whatever it is for you, whatever really does energize you, whatever is instructive to you, whatever is inspiring to you, that really is your job to put yourself, when you can, in those moments. And so, I mean, how often are we going to be walking through Geneva? I mean, not very often, but you could read about John Calvin. You could read about his life. That would do it for me. Be around people who think big, kingdom thoughts, or that are very, very godly. So I would want to say, as much as anything, this is a podcast about just leading yourself and putting yourself in a position where you grow. And so, going back with John Knox, who's the Edinburgh guy, not the Geneva guy. So when I opened the Bible, the Geneva Study Bible, I opened it up to John 17, and that is, I think this is true, is what his wife, John Knox's wife, read to him on his deathbed. And I just read that in his own, he would have basically penned the translation that his wife would have, would have read to him, and all the turmoil that he went through in the church. And to know that his very last words he wanted read was John 17. And he was, he would have been, because he stood on truth, he was divisive, and Jesus talking about unity, and that whole idea of unity it just sealed in my heart. And that if you happen to be in Edinburgh, Scotland, I'd swing by John Knox's grave. If not, just look up the picture. And John Knox was an incredibly important man. He probably the number 1, number 2 most important Christian in all of Scotland. And he's buried right outside of St. Giles Cathedral, where he would have preached. And have you been there?
I've not.
Okay.
No, I've got to go.
This is
Maybe soon.
if you're in the neighborhood, swing by. And so basically, everybody would have been buried around the church, and they have paved over that area, because it's just downtown. They need the parking places. They did John Knox kind of the solid of putting a plaque where he's buried. And so if you can imagine a parking lot, you just blacktop, and then there's one little plaque out there, and it's in parking space 23. You can look it up, and that's where John Knox was buried. Wow. And there's just a plaque to remember it. And then every day, someone, I always imagine a Peugeot, which is a European car, a little Peugeot pulls in there and leaks oil right on John Knox's grave. And when I sat there, when I was there, I just, to drive this point home, it was amazing for me, because I just thought, I'm no John Knox, and everyone else in here in this parking lot was paved over. That's what they'll do for me, and I just won't be remembered. So I don't have to burn my calories kind of thinking about legacy. wondering how I'm going to be remembered, trying to position myself to look like I will die and be forgotten. My kids and maybe my grandkids will remember. After that, no one will remember me. And rather than being discouraged as I sat there, it was really, really freeing. I was like, I'm just free.
Yeah.
I can just go.
Yeah.
I can go be faithful and take risks, and I don't have to worry about legacy. So those are the types of things that I was trying to drive home with this. So okay, so I've got one more point here, and this really was, man, it was a moment. So we're in the church, where Calvin preached, and then off to the side is a little chapel. It's called, I think, the Maccabean chapel, and we're in there, and the tour guide is just kind of talking through some stuff. I can't remember what that one was all about, but all of a sudden, about 60, 70 people from Korea walk in this chapel. Right,
Wow.
so that wouldn't on my bingo card in Geneva, Switzerland, to see all these brothers and sisters from Geneva, or from Korea. So we kind of finish up tour guide's talk, and it comes out that these guys want to sing as soon as we're done talking, and so tour guide wraps up quick, and then their tour guide goes over and kind of starts the singing, and so it's in Korean. So the first words I have no idea what they're saying until I know exactly what they're saying.
Okay.
Exactly what they're saying. And they sing 2 hymns. First was How Great Thou Art.
Wow.
And so we're singing in English as they sing in Korean. And then the second one was It Is Well With My Soul.
Wow.
And so back to your first question about what was that like to be in a post-Christian, kind of area. It is post-Christian in many respects, Geneva. And that church, I asked the guide, so I can't confirm this firsthand, but he just said it's a pretty liberal. They still meet. I don't even know that they believe 1/3 of the things that John Calvin preached. It's kind of Christian in name only. So maybe John Calvin would have thought, that his work, his life, his impact would have been that this church would have gone on, and it wasn't. But I think for John Calvin, I think for us, is that, his work in and through us will go on in ways we can't possibly account for. And I thought, I wonder if John Calvin could even find Korea on a map.
Yeah, right.
And if you said, hey, here's actually will be your biggest legacy, was like, North America. There will be these people that will read. This is going to, you didn't translate your works into English, but they will be translated into English and into Korean. And we sat in that chapel, and I'm just not I don't think I'm a robot, but I'm not incredibly emotive when it comes to tears and things like that. But brother, I could not fight him back, Wow. And my wife just looked at me like, okay, bud, you're having a moment here. And she grabbed my hand, and we sang and we listened, and I was just, I was aware that I was a part of something so much bigger than just me, or than just John Calvin. There's a global church,
Yes,
and his work had an impact that he couldn't account for. And then I think in some ways ours, not at the same grandiose level, but I think when we are ministering to people who will have kids, who will have kids, who will have kids, there's a sense that our work can't be accounted for, and I think if it matters to us when we get to heaven, and I don't know that it will, we'll be deeply encouraged and really, really glad, like Calvin, that we just kind of were faithful in this moment. So that was it, brother.
What a beautiful story in that. When you were telling that story, John, I'm thinking of what Jesus says in Matthew 28, what he says again in John 1:8 to his guys, this idea that he is doing something on a global level that spans language and culture and time. And you got to have a glimpse of 500 years of what Jesus is doing in one moment. And what an incredible thing. And I think, you talked earlier about maybe this wasn't your words, but this was the concept I took away of. not taking ourselves so seriously.
Yeah.
Our legacy, like
Yeah.
we're just a flash in the pan,
Yep.
and we'll be forgotten. I've done so many funerals, and every one I've ever done, there's this awkward moment 30 minutes after we just grieve where everybody's like, where do you want to go eat? And that's just life, right? Like we move on, and yet through our individual stories and lives, God is doing this beautiful thing. And one day we'll be together forever with Jesus, and we will see people from every tongue and tribe and from every time too, which is going to be so incredible. So that's got to encourage us today. Like, hey, you're not that important, but what God has called you to do is globally, historically important, and He's going to see it through. And
Amen.
Wherever you're at in ministry today, like you can rejoice in that. Like
Amen.
It's going to have a great ending, and we all get to be a part of it.
Amen. That's a really good place to end. Brother, thank you. Well, friends, I hope something in here was an encouragement to you and your good work that you're doing. We just hold you in high regard for all the ways you're trying to be faithful, wherever God has you. If it's Geneva or someplace we can't find on a map, we're grateful for the really good work that you do. So if you have any questions, you have any comments, any theological corrections for this episode, you can always reach us at clp@watermark.org. That's clp@watermark.org. We'll talk to you again next time.